Landfall. Boo! About 6 months ago, another couple introduced myself and my wife to Magic the Gathering for the very first time, specifically Commander, and we fell in love with it pretty much immediately. As beginners, naturally, we played with primarily pre-constructed decks, but I found myself gravitating towards wanting to build my own decks rather quickly, so much so to the point that within the 6 months that I've been playing Magic the Gathering, I have constructed about 11 of my own decks so far. In fact, I think I probably enjoy building decks more than I enjoy actually playing the game at this point. But whilst I like all 11 of these decks, I actually would say I love all 11 of these decks, there's one of them that just scratches my brain a little bit more than the rest of them do. And it's this Galadriel of Lothlorien Simic deck that focuses primarily on landfall and scrying. So much so to the degree that with this deck, you can get 35 lands out on the field on the exact same turn. And it's stuff like that that makes me love Magic and love Commander. Because whilst I'm, don't get me wrong, trying to win to a certain degree, I like doing stuff that makes people at the table look at me and be like, did you seriously just do that? You had to have cheated somewhere. And I think one of the reasons I love this deck so much is one of my favorite parts about Commander is the social aspect and making your friends, making your siblings, making your wife who is at the table with you just look at you and be like, did you seriously just play 30 lands in a single turn and generate 30 creature tokens at the same time and double the 1/1 counters on a creature 30 times so now it has a trillion counters on it? Wow, that's really cool. Honey, that's cool, right? Must not be home. Oh, and by the way, this entire deck you can put together for about $30. So, let me show you how it works. Now, the commander of the deck is going to be Galadriel of Lothlorien, who is going to be the one that allows us to play so many extra lands in a single turn. She reads, whenever you scry, you may reveal the top card of your library. If a land card is revealed this way, put it onto the battlefield tapped. And the cool thing about this is anytime you scry, even if it's just scry 1, that basically means that if one of the top 2 cards of your library are a land, then it's going on the battlefield. Because the way that scry works is you get to look at the card, and then you get to decide whether or not you want to put it back on top or on the bottom of your deck. So with Galadriel, if you scry and you see, oh, that's not a land, I'm just going to move it to the bottom of my deck, and then I'm going to take a bit of a gamble and hope that the next one is a land, because then, after you do the scry, then you can reveal the top card of your library. You'll reveal it. If it's a land, cool, you won the gamble, and it goes on the board. And this only gets easier to do when you scry in higher amounts. If you scry 2, then you only need one of the top 3 cards to be a land. If you scry 3, which you can do very easily with her other ability, anytime the ring tempts you, if you choose a creature other than Galadriel as your ring bearer, you can do that, and you only need one of the top 4 cards of your library to be a land to get out onto the battlefield. But that in and of itself is not going to get all of our lands out on the battlefield in the exact same turn. For that, we're going to need 3 additional pieces. The first of these pieces is going to be Retreat to Coralhelm, which is an enchantment that has landfall where anytime a land enters, you can either tap or untap a target creature, which is solid, but what we really care about is the option to scry 1. Obviously, this means if we play a land, we get to scry 1, which will then trigger Galadriel's ability. And if through Galadriel's ability we can find another land and put it on the battlefield, that will trigger landfall again, allowing us to rinse and repeat and play lands as long as we can continue running into them. Alternatively, in the late game, the first option for Retreat to Coralhelm is actually particularly good, because once you get into a late game scenario where you get some game-ending creatures on your board, you can hit a couple land drops, tap target creatures that your opponents control, leave them without any blockers, and then just swing at them while they're defenseless and take them out of the game just like that. Now you might be thinking, wait a minute, Mac, isn't it kind of bad that part of our infinite land drop loop is reliant on one particular card? And the answer is maybe sort of yes, but at the same time, in a deck where you're constantly scrying and shuffling cards at the bottom and drawing so many cards, you're going to run into this card with relative ease pretty frequently early on in most of your playstays. And even if you don't run into this card, we have so many other things in this deck that are going to allow you to scry so much to take tons of advantage of Galadriel's ability to get so many lands on the field. But as far as the infinite land drop loop goes, once we have these 2 cards on our board, we need 2 other pieces. One of those other pieces is going to be a card that allows us to scry anytime a creature enters the battlefield. We can do this with things like Elrond, Lord of Rivendell, where anytime he or another creature enters the battlefield, we can scry 1. And if it's the second time this ability is resolved, the ring is going to tempt us, which will give us a scry 3 proc through Galadriel as well. We also have stuff like Sylvan Anthem, where anytime a green creature enters, we get to scry 1, and we also get +1/+1 to all our green creatures. And we also have something like Season of Growth, where anytime a creature enters, we scry 1. And if we cast a spell that targets a creature we control, we can draw a card for a little bit of card draw as well. Now, the reason we care so much about getting scries whenever we have creatures enter the battlefield is because of the final piece of this pseudo-infinite loop, which is going to be cards that have landfall triggers that generate creature tokens. Something like Scute Swarm is absolutely incredible in this deck, as whenever a land enters, you create a 1/1 green insect creature token, which will proc one of these 3 cards if you have them on the board. Scute Swarm furthermore is awesome because if you control 6 or more lands, which happens very quickly with this deck, you instead create a token that's a copy of Scute Swarm instead, which means you are then doubling your Scute Swarm anytime you play a land, as each Scute Swarm that you now generate will proc the effect on its own. So you'll go from 2 to 4, 4 to 8, 8 to 16, 32, 64, and so on. We also have stuff like Elfsworn Giant, where anytime a land enters, we create a 1/1 green elf warrior creature token. Stuff like Zendikar's Royal, where anytime a land enters, we make a 2/2 green elemental creature token. Or finally, Rampaging Balos, where anytime a land enters, we make a 4/4 green beast creature token. So the way this pseudo-infinite land drop combo works is that just with these 4 pieces alone, all we need is for 1 of every 3 cards in our deck to be a land. So let's say we enter our turn and we play our land drop. That is both going to trigger the landfall for Retreat to Coralhelm to allow us to scry 1, and it's going to generate a creature token. I'll use the Pine Cone as to hold its place since I don't have anything else on hand, which is then going to trigger the scry 1 from Elrond, Lord of Rivendell. So we have 2 scry 1 procs on the stack, which means we can take advantage of Galadriel's procs. So what we'll do is, we'll do the Retreat to Coralhelm scry and see that it is not a land. So per scry, we'll go ahead and throw it to the bottom of our deck, and then gamble a little bit to reveal the top card of our library for Galadriel, and just hope that it's a land. Bummer, it's not a land, so it'll go right back, but that's okay, because we still have the scry 1 proc from Elrond. So we'll scry, knowing it's not a land, we'll put it at the bottom of our deck, and then gamble again with Galadriel, hope that it's a land. Boom, it is, it comes in tapped, and now we get another landfall proc from Retreat to Coralhelm, and another token generated from Scute Swarm, which then procs another scry 1 through Elrond, Lord of Rivendell. And this loop gets even better if you hit multiple lands in a row, because you basically stack up the scry procs that you didn't use to reach whatever land you got to. So in another example, let's say we do our land drop for our turn, that'll proc landfall on Retreat to Coralhelm, generate a token from Scute Swarm, which will proc scry from Elrond. So we'll do the scry from Retreat to Coralhelm. We see that it's a land, so we're going to put it right back on top, because next up is Galadriel's proc to reveal the top card of our library, which is a land, which will come out on the battlefield tapped. Now that'll again trigger another landfall proc from Retreat to Coralhelm and generate another creature token through Scute Swarm, even though we haven't even used the initial scry 1 proc from our first token. So now we basically have 3 scry 1s ready to go, 2 from the creature tokens from Elrond and another from Retreat to Coralhelm. So we'll go ahead and scry again. Ooh, it's another land. We'll put it back on top, reveal it through Galadriel, put it back on the battlefield. Now we have another land proc. Now we have another creature token and another scry ready to go, which means we can basically now at the current moment scry 4 times to try and hit another land because of the built up banked scries that we have through Elrond still on the stack. So with this combo alone, even if we aren't able to get every single land out in one go, we are always going to be able to hit a lot of subsequent back-to-back lands until eventually we hit a streak in our deck where we are not drawing any lands and we run out of our scry triggers. At that point, we have tons of things that can give us additional scry triggers to either continue finding lands and putting them on the battlefield, or cycling through our deck once we've already gotten all our lands out to find some of our game ender pieces that we were putting at the bottom in favor of searching for lands. Things like Jace Mirror Mage, who has a kicker where you can pay to duplicate him on cast, which we will always do, because then you can do scry 2 every single turn twice from him and his duplicate. We've also got Nissa, Steward of Elements, which you can do a 2 loyalty to scry 2. Sigiled Starfish is going to allow you to tap it to scry 1. We've got Cryptic Annelid, which is really cool in this deck because this card alone in conjunction with Galadriel can potentially get you 3 lands on his play, because you'll scry 1 and then scry 2 and then scry 3, all of which are separate scry triggers, all of which will separately proc Galadriel's ability. We've then got Serum Sovereign, where anytime we cast a non-creature spell, we'll put an oil counter on Serum Sovereign, and then we can pay a blue to remove an oil counter, draw a card, and then scry 2, so we can basically bank scries if we want to. We've got Gandalf, Friend of the Shire, who admittedly is not incredible in this deck, I really like having him in here because we do have a decent amount of ring tempting in the deck, and being able to get card draw when we do ring tempt is nice. Plus, I love Lord of the Rings, and you gotta have Gandalf in the Lord of the Rings deck where applicable if you can, of course. Then we have Birthday Escape, which is going to draw a card, and the ring is going to tempt you, which is going to give us a Scry 3 through Galadriel's first ability. And then we have, just generally speaking, a lot of drawing stuff and Scry stuff so that we can continue kicking off our landfall loop. Stuff like Opt, Serum Visions, Draw a Card Scry 2, Preordain Scry 2, Deliberate Scry 2, Joint Exploration, which is going to be a Scry 2, and then if we want to pay the kicker, if this spell was kicked, you may put a land card from your hand onto the battlefield. Since with Galadriel we can't cheat lands from our hand to the battlefield, we can only cheat them out with Scrying, so if you have a surplus of lands in your hand, you can get an extra one out through that. Arwen's Gift is going to be a Scry 2, Track Down and Elven Farsight are both going to be a Scry 3. Mystic Speculation is really cool because it costs 1 blue to Scry 3, or if you pay the buyback along with it for a total of 3 mana, you can infinitely Scry 3 for as long as you have mana to do so, which is very nice for either getting a ton of lands out, because Scry 3, if 1 in 4 cards at the top of your deck is a land, you're getting it out through Galadriel, or alternatively, once your lands are all already out, you can repeat through this Scry 3 to cycle through the rest of your deck, put the cards that you don't want on the bottom to find some of your game ender pieces. Horses of the Brunnen is really cool because we get a Scry 1 proc from Galadriel, a Ring Tempt, which gives us a Scry 3 from Galadriel, which is a second potential landfall proc, and we get to return up to 2 target creatures to their owner's hand, so a little bit of a defensive situation there. Crystal Ball is good for 1 mana tap to Scry 2, Life Crafter's Bestiary at the beginning of your upkeep, Scry 1, and then whenever we cast a creature spell, we may pay green to draw a card. That again helps us get to some of our game ender pieces once we get all of our lands out. Mirror of Galadriel, 5 and tap to Scry 1, costs 1 less to activate for each creature we control, and we get to draw a card as well. This one admittedly maybe not super good in this deck, but Mirror of Galadriel, gotta go in the Galadriel deck, you know how it is. Netherese Puzzle Ward, on our upkeep we get a free Scry, and if we roll a 4 we get a free draw as well. Song of Erendil gives us Scry, Treasure Token, Bird Token, and a flying counter on every creature we control without flying, which is awesome because if we get our big stompy creatures out and we throw a flying token on them, then they're basically unblockable unless our opponents have flying or reach. And Search of Greatness is really fun because at the beginning of your upkeep, you basically get a free permanent cast of any spell that you have in your hand that is 1 plus the highest mana value that you have amongst other permanents on your field. And if you don't want to take advantage of that, you can just Scry 1 instead. And then one of my favorite cards in this deck is going to be the Temporal Anchor, where at the beginning of your upkeep you get to Scry 2, but then anytime you would Scry and put those cards at the bottom of your library, you'll then exile that many cards from the bottom of your library after you do that. One of the potential problems you might run into in this deck is while you're scrying and searching for lands to try and get your land procs through Galadriel, you're going to be putting a lot of stuff that you're going to need later in the game down at the bottom of your deck, which isn't inherently terrible because you scry and draw so much with this that you'll find it again eventually, but Temporal Anchor is really cool because anytime you scry something that's not a land, you'll put it at the bottom and then you'll basically exile it aside to put it in the bank so that once you do get all your lands out, you can just play from exile on your turn and it's all sitting there waiting for you. So you can get all your game ending stuff kind of in an exile pile that you'll get in there from scrying at the bottom and putting it at the bottom with Temporal Anchor, and then boom, throw every single thing out, and then once you have all your lands out, and then you can nuke everyone. The next category we have is what I'm going to call Scry enhancement cards. So they're cards that give us ancillary benefits whenever we do end up scrying. Arwen Indumiel, for example, gives us a +1/+1 on a target creature anytime we scry. We can also pay 6 to proc a Scry 2. Elrond, Master of Healing, is going to allow us to put a 1/1 counter on up to X target creatures, where X is the number of cards looked at while scrying this way, and anytime a creature we control with a 1/1 counter on it becomes the target of a spell or an ability an opponent controls, we get a little bit of card draw. And then one of my favorite cards in this entire deck is going to be Kennesos, Priest of Thassa. If you would scry a number of cards, you can scry that many cards +1 instead. And this guy is absolutely awesome, not only for cycling through your deck to find your game ender pieces once you get your lands out, but for getting the lands out in and of themselves. If you have this guy paired up with your infinite potential combo, now instead of needing 1 of every 3 cards on the top of your deck to be a land, you only need 1 of every 5 cards on the top of your deck to be a land, which statistically, you're probably going to be able to get through the entire thing and get all of your lands out in one go. And the next category is going to be other landfall procs that aren't necessarily helping or contributing to our infinite loop, but are just generally speaking pretty good because we play a lot of lands. Tireless Provisioner is going to give us a food or treasure token anytime we get a land. We're probably going to want to go with the food token with this. We don't really need the treasures because we have so much mana with all the land that we're getting out early, and food just kind of is a little fail-safe in case people start plinking away at you. Tachova, Benthic Druid, is going to give us a life and draw a card anytime a land enters. Now, Avenger of Zendikar is kind of interesting with this deck, where when he enters, we create a 0/1 green plant creature token for every land we control, and then he also has a landfall proc to give a +1/+1 counter to all of those green plant creature tokens anytime an additional land comes out. Generally speaking, you'll either want to play this fella in the mid game or in the late game. In the mid game, you'll play him when you have anywhere from 10 to 15 lands out, which will probably happen on around turn 5, 6, maybe 7. And in that situation, you're making 10 to 15 green plant creature tokens, and then you're trying to get all of your lands out, and every land that you do get out is going to give a +1/+1 to those green plant creature tokens, which means once you get all your lands out, you've got like 15 green plant creature tokens that are all like +15, +15. Alternatively, if you play this guy when all of your lands are already out, you'll create anywhere from 37 to 38 green plant creature tokens, and then unless an opponent has something big with trample or a lot of flying, you basically have a brick wall in front of you that's going to take a very long time for your opponents to get through. The next category is going to be our game ender cards. So once we get most of our lands out on the battlefield, this is how we close out the game. First, we've got Matoya Archon Elder, who in and of herself is not necessarily a game-ending piece, but she's going to help us get to our game-ending pieces and cycle back through our deck really quickly, because whenever we Scry or Surveil, we get to draw a card afterwards. That'll just help us get to our game-ending pieces a little bit more quickly and get them in our hands so we can play them. Similarly, Genesis Wave, an X-cost sorcery, allows us to reveal the top X cards of our library and then put any number of permanent cards with mana value X or less from them onto the battlefield. This is really cool because if we have all our lands out, we can play this where X is like 20 or something and get every single thing in our deck out on the field, and then we're pretty unstoppable from there. Also something like Sylvan Awakening, where until our next turn, all of our lands become 2/2 elemental creatures with reach, indestructible, and haste. So if you got 30 plus lands out there and you snap your fingers and oh, now they're all magically 2/2 creatures and they have indestructible and haste, your opponents ain't going to like that too much. We also have a lot of creatures with X in their mana cost, where X is the number of 1/1 counters that they get when you put them on the battlefield, which is really awesome considering how quickly we get to 30 plus lands. Genesis Hydra enters with X 1/1 counters on it, and it can also bring out an additional creature along with it, because you'll get to reveal X cards of your library and then play a permanent from them onto the battlefield with X mana value or less. Haldir Lorien Lieutenant is the same story, X and a green, where he enters with X +1/+1 counters on it. Additionally, you can pay 5 and a green to give other elves Vigilance and +1/+1 for every +1/+1 counter on Haldir. So if you pay, for example, 20 to make him a 20/20, and then pay 5 and a green, you give the 20/20 to all of the other elves on your battlefield as well and give them Vigilance. Hydroid Crassus is also really cool because you get half X life, draw half X cards, he has flying and trample and enters with X +1/+1 counters, and Kura of the Boundless Sky is one of my favorite cards in this deck because he has flying and death touch, a 4/4, and when he dies, you can create an XX green spirit creature token where X is the number of lands you control. So this thing is a really nice deterrent if anyone has a big creature and they're considering swinging it at you, because you can just dive bomb Kura at that big creature and basically sacrifice Kura to generate a 30/30 green spirit creature token, and that's definitely a tough consideration to make when someone's going to be considering swinging at you. Now, when we think about all of these massive creatures that we're going to be potentially bringing out, where we pay 25 or 30 for the X value, then we take something like Overwhelming Stampede, where until the end of the turn, creatures you control gain trample and get +X/+X, where X is the greatest power among creatures you control. So if we have a 20/20 or a 20/25 or something like that, and we have all of our creature tokens that we got from our landfall procs from this category, then we're basically giving everything trample and everything 20/20, and that's basically an auto game win unless someone has like Heroic Intervention or something like that. Next, we have Thassa, God of the Sea, who is really nice because they give us a Scry 1 at the beginning of our upkeep, and because we can pay 1 in a blue to make it so that a creature we control cannot be blocked this turn. So we get one of those 30/30s out on our board, pay 1 in a blue, and then boom, there's nothing anyone can do about it. We get to hit them for 30. Finally, we have Ren's Run Packmaster, where we can pay 2 and a green as many times as we want, by the way, because we do not have to tap her to do this, to create a 2/2 green wolf creature token, and wolves we control have Death Touch. So we have 30 lands on the field or so, we can rip this 10 times. We have 10 2/2 green wolves, and all of them have Death Touch, which is pretty nice. Next up, we have our insurance policies, our protection, our removal, and all that goodness, starting with Eternal Witness, where anytime they enter the battlefield, we may return a target card from our graveyard to our hand. This one we kind of want to save for the late game, because if we run into a situation where we play one of our game enders, and for whatever reason it gets counterspelled, or maybe it gets targeted with removal, or something of that nature, we can then play Eternal Witness right after to get it from the graveyard back in our hand, and run it back after our opponents have exhausted their board wipes, counterspells, and all that goodness. We've also got Reclamation Sage, where they enter, we may destroy destroy a target artifact or enchantment. Scroll of Isildur is nice because we get to take someone's artifact, we get a ring tempt, which is going to be a Scry 3 through Galadriel, then we get to tap 2 opponent creatures, then we get to put stun counters on them, and then we get to get some card draw out of it as well. Devastation Tide, also really good. Return all non-land permanents to their owner's hands. This is nice because you're always going to have more lands and therefore more mana than everyone else that you're playing with. So you get hurt by this the least because it's easiest for you to get all of those things back from your hand out onto the battlefield before everyone else can. Sapphire Dragon is nice because whenever it attacks or blocks, you scry 2, or you can use it for its 2 and a blue to counterspell something. We've also got Heroic Intervention, so that permanents you control gain hexproof and indestructible until end of turn. Shower of Arrows is going to destroy a target artifact, enchantment, or creature with flying, and then scry 1. Glorious Gale will counter a target creature spell, and if it's legendary, the ring will tempt you, which will give you a scry 3. And then finally, Soothing of Smeagol, which will allow us to return a target non-token creature to its owner's hand, and then the ring is going to tempt us. Finally, we have our lands, which is primarily looking to scry stuff for us, starting with Rivendell, which lets us pay 1 and a blue and tap it to scry 2. Castle Vantress will let us play 2 and 2 blue and tap it to scry 2. And then we have a lot that let us scry 1 on land entry, so we have Crystal Grotto, Temple of Mystery will do that, Grey Havens will do that, and Zelfir and Void. We then have Mystic Sanctuary, which allows you to put a target instant or sorcery card from your graveyard on top of your library if it enters untapped, which is going to occur when we control 3 or more islands, which is very easy to get that many islands out on the board. And this is cool to not only get, you can get like another Scry engine back at the top, or if you want to, you can get one of your game enders back at the top of your deck as well if you would like. And then we have a couple dual color lands, stuff like Tangled Islet, Vine Glimmer Snarl, Hinterland Harbor, and then finally, of course, Command Tower. Now, everything I've shown you so far, you're looking at anywhere from 30 to 35 bucks, which is cheaper than basically every Commander precon on the market. This deck is so cheap, in fact, that I actually proxied it and then looked at the deck list afterwards and realized that it would have been less expensive to actually buy the real cards for this deck than it was to buy the materials to be able to proxy this instead. That being said, if you are willing to take this deck into the $50 to $55 territory by picking up 2 upgrades, these are what I would recommend because they are exceptionally good and very fun. The first of which is Craterhoof Behemoth, where when it enters, creatures you control gain trample and get +X/+X until end of turn, where X is the number of creatures you control, which you're going to have a lot of creatures because all the tokens you're generating from your landfall procs. The final card, though, is probably my favorite card of the entire deck, and if you are going to get one expensive card for this deck, get this $10 Mossborn Hydra, because it is a 3 mana cost with trample, enters with a +1/+1 counter on it, and has landfall, where whenever a land you control enters, double the number of +1/+1 counters on this creature. So, let me take you through a little scenario and show you why this is my favorite card. Imagine this enters, and it has a +1/+1 counter on it. And then you play your land for turn, and that is going to double the +1/+1 counters, so now it is a +2/+2. Then that is going to proc off your Scry loop and get you an infinitely chaining number of lands, assuming that you don't get extremely unlucky with your land drops. So now, let's say you get a Galadriel trigger to play to reveal land and it comes in tapped. That's going to double him again, and now he's a +4/+4. Let's say you hit another 10 subsequent lands through that recursive loop, which is not unrealistic. I've done it many, many times. In fact, it's more likely for it to happen with these pieces on the board than for it not to happen. If we get another 10 lands on the board, that is going to take him to 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, a 2048 creature. Let's say we get another 10 lands. We get 21 lands out in the same turn, which again, I've done plenty of times. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. I think I missed one. That will be, what is that? 4,194,304 attack and toughness. Let's say the stars align and our combo hits pretty early and we get another 10 lands. We have 7 lands on our board already and our combo is able to loop through our entire deck and we get the remaining 31 lands out on the board while Mossborn Hydra is out. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. I don't know what the math is on that, but I think it's, if I'm not mistaken, I think it's 4.3 billion. You can get to a trillion. You can get like hundreds of billions. I don't know. You'll have enough, and it has trample, by the way. It has trample, and I don't think anyone's getting millions of life, so I think you'll be okay. Now, like I said, I've only been playing Magic for about 6 months now, and I've been deck building for less than that. So there are probably a decent amount of ways that you can make this deck a little bit better, honestly. You'll notice I don't use any game changers in these decks because I, generally speaking, try to stay around the bracket 3 territory. I didn't use a card like Elvish Mariner, which would be particularly good in this deck, to be completely honest, because whenever you scry, you get to tap up to X target non-land permanents, where X is the number of cards like that scrying this way. So you can, but the reason I don't do that is I don't really like stopping my opponents from doing things. I like winning by just kind of overwhelming the board state. Also, stuff like Lost Isle Calling could be really, really good in this deck, but I try to avoid stuff like extra turns because it's a little strong for the group that I typically play with. Stuff like Tiller Engine can also be really, really good. This card's awesome because whenever a land enters the battlefield tapped and under your control, you can either untap that land or you can tap a target non-land permanent in opponent controls. I didn't include this one because it's 20 bucks and it would have taken, it's literally like 66% of the cost of the deck would be in this one card, so I omitted it for that reason. But you can upgrade this in a couple of different ways. I'm sure there's more ways that you can upgrade it, to be completely honest. But this is the foundation that I've got so far, and I've been absolutely loving it, and I think you'll enjoy it a lot too. So I hope you enjoyed this video. This is obviously, if you've been watching any of my content, I typically primarily do Destiny stuff, and I still plan to do very much mostly Destiny stuff. But, you know, I got multiple hobbies, you know? Nothing wrong with that, and I kind of wanted to try something new. So I hope you enjoyed. Thank you so much for watching, and as always, have a great day.